All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for part one of our three-part cattle and carcass training webinar series. I'm Jody Pitcock, and I'm with the USDA Agriculture Marketing Service, Livestock and Poultry Programs. This webinar series is hosted by AMS in partnership with our USDA Cattle and Carcass Training Center at Colorado State University. The Cattle and Carcass Training Centers were established in 2019 in order to collaborate with industry and academia in providing educational and training opportunities for stakeholders interested in official quality grading of feeder cattle, fed cattle, and beef carcasses in the United States. In addition to CSU, training centers were established at West Texas A&M University in Canyon, Texas, and USDA Meat Animal Research Center in Clay Center, Nebraska. Tonight's webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on the USDA website within the coming weeks. You can find recordings and materials from our fall 2020 webinar series on that website currently. Our speakers this evening will take you on a journey to explore Livestock Mandatory Reporting, otherwise known as LMR, live cattle reports, and how information found in these reports can be used to manage risk. We estimate our training tonight will take approximately 1 hour, and we will do our best not to go over time. As participants tonight, you are in listen-only mode, but you will have the opportunity to ask questions to the participants to the presenters after their presentations, and at the conclusion of the session, we will have an overall Q&A. You'll notice down on the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A icon located on the Zoom toolbar. Use that to submit your questions. Our speakers will answer as many questions as we have time that will allow. The purpose of this webinar series is to educate cattle industry stakeholders about what the Livestock Mandatory Reporting, or LMR, where you can find the reports, how to understand them, how to use to facilitate marketing decisions, and to mitigate risk. We understand there is a tremendous interest right now in how the U.S. cattle supply chain operates more broadly, but the focus of our presentations is solely on the existing resources USDA manages and provides to the public. At this time, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker tonight, and then we will get started. First speaker tonight is Mr. Charlie Potts. Charlie is the Supervised Market Reporting with the USDA Agriculture Marketing Service Livestock, Poultry, and Grain Market News Division. He's a native of Effingham, Kansas. Charlie grew up surrounded by and involved in both livestock and row crop production. After receiving a bachelor's in science in animal science from Kansas State University, Charlie joined USDA as a meat grader in 2005, worked in Nebraska and Kansas before joining the market news team in 2009 and relocating to Missouri, where he supervises the USDA Livestock Mandatory Reporting, specifically live cattle and sheep reports. Charlie is going to introduce us to LMR reports in general, how AMS collects this information, and how specific reports are utilized.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Jody. It's great to be here tonight to talk about livestock mandatory reporting, also known as LMR for live cattle reports. Over the years, we've gotten many requests here in the office from stakeholders to put together a program like this, so it's great to be here tonight. Before I start, I just want to try to give you a 30,000-foot view of how LMR for live cattle reporting works. One question we get here a lot is what's the threshold for packers to report? The law asks for all packers that harvest over 125,000 head per year to report to LMR. Currently, LMR covers around 92% of all fed cattle transactions, and this covers plants throughout the country. Besides fed cattle, LMR also covers cow and bull transactions. Currently, we grab around 33% of all cow and bull transactions, as the auction setting is a much more popular setting for marketing those cattle versus fed cattle. What is AMS's role in LMR live cattle reporting? Well, this all began with the passage of the Livestock Mandatory Reporting Act of 1999. Our first live cattle reports were published in early of spring of 2001. As you can see, we publish reports on a daily, weekly, monthly, as well as annual basis, and handle several thousand records per day. We do get questions from time to time about how we audit the packers for accuracy. The Livestock and Poultry Grain Market News Division does have a group of compliance auditors that audits for each plant at least twice a year to ensure accuracy. Also, AMS preserves the confidentiality of all transactions of all the data that is supplied to us through LMR. Now I'm going to kind of give you a breakdown of the first bucket on all of our data for live cattle, which will be the purchase types. The purchase type is based off of how the cattle are priced. And the first one I'm going to talk about tonight is about negotiated cash. Negotiated cash, or is also known as a spot market, where the price is determined through buyer and seller interaction. And this transaction, once the deal is struck, the price will not change no matter how the cattle perform or if there are any discounts applied. The one way I can describe this is like negotiating for a car or truck, where at any time the buyer and seller can walk away from the deal. The next purchase type we'll talk about is the formula. The formula is an advanced commitment of cattle by any means other than negotiated grid, or the forward contract. Formulas use some kind of pricing mechanism to calculate the price that may or may not be known at the time the deal is struck. Some examples of this is 50 cents over the Nebraska weighted average, the 5 area steers greater than 80% price, or a combination of a weekly report by regions. Basically, formulas can use any type of mechanism to determine the base price. As well as determining the base price, formulas can have premiums and discounts applied to them. Now, a forward contract is an agreement to purchase cattle based off of a publicly quoted price, mostly used off of the CME. Forward contracts can also have premiums and discounts applied to them. And the last purchase type we have is a negotiated grid. The negotiated grid is very similar to a negotiated cash purchase, where the mechanism is the same between a buyer and seller to negotiate the base price. The difference between a negotiated grid and a negotiated cash is a negotiated grid can have premiums and discounts applied to them based on carcass characteristics or how the cattle perform. Some examples of this would be source and age verified as a premium. A discount could be over 30 months, heavy carcasses, dark cutters, and so on. Before we move on, I also want to touch on a question we get a lot about packer-owned cattle. How does that fit into LMR? Packer-owned cattle by LMR definition are cattle that the packers own for at least 14 days before slaughter. And this isn't where the cattle are sold and it takes greater than 14 days to get them delivered. This is when the packer owns the cattle, paying the feed bill, medication bill if needed, and so forth, where they have sole ownership of them. They make up a very, very small percentage of all LMR transactions. Now, to get all you, the audience, involved, I have a poll question here tonight. My question is, which purchase type accounts for the largest number of live cattle transactions? Well, thank you all for who participated in this poll question. If you selected formula, you selected right. Let me talk a little bit about the history of the purchase types and how they've changed over time. Here's a chart of just negotiated cash and formula transactions over the years, starting back in 2005. As you can tell, back in 2005, negotiated cash was the dominating purchase type in all live cattle purchases for livestock mandatory reporting, with formulas making up around 35%. You can tell as that orange line of formulas, as we go through time, they have gained popularity, as well as that blue line as we went through time as negotiated cash numbers have dwindled. Since April of this year, to give a state of where we're at right now, cash has ran between 18 and 19% of all cattle transactions. Formulas have been in the low 60%. Forward contracts have been 13 to 14%, with negotiated grids accounting for around 6 to 7%. So now I'm going to try to discuss the reporting forms on how we get data to us from the packer. The way this works is USDA has reporting forms that are standardized that the packer is required to submit to us. So that way we get data in a standardized version and we can analyze it in our own program. The first reporting form we'll talk about tonight is the LPS 113, or as we call it, simply the 113. This reporting form has the current established prices for us. So basically every LMR live cattle report that you see of fed cattle that has prices on it is fed to us through this reporting form. One thing I want to touch on about how our reporting periods work. We have data reported to us at 10 a.m. in the morning and 2 p.m. in the afternoon. We have about an hour turnaround time that we like to publish reports after that. The live cattle reporting week begins on Monday afternoon at 2 p.m. and ends the next Monday morning at 10 a.m. The reason for this is at times negotiated cash transactions will happen late on Friday afternoon after the last reporting period of the day. That way, those transactions will be captured and submitted to USDA Monday morning, and we can have a true snapshot for that weekly price. Some of the most popular reports that are fed through the LPS 113 is the National Weekly Formula Contracting Grid Report, as well as the 5-area weekly negotiated cash report. Here's a snapshot of data once it's put into our system from these reporting forms, looking at it from a market news reporter's standpoint. If you look closely, you can see where you can read purchase types, class codes, selling basis, percent choice of better, dressing percentages, as well as origins. So this is just a snapshot of what we as market news reporters look at as we're analyzing data. Now here's a screenshot of the 5-area weekly weighted average. One thing I wanted to touch on tonight is just kind of a snapshot of how to read our reports. As you can see where I have highlighted in red where it says confirmed, where it has a little bit over 67,000 head of cattle, that is the total negotiated trade for the 5-area for that reporting week, from the previous Monday afternoon to that Monday morning. That total confirmed number will include all types of negotiated transactions of beef type fed cattle, dairy breds, as well as mixed steer heifer cows. The next one that I have highlighted for the week ago of a little bit over 84,000 head is the exact same number, only from the previous week, running from 2 p.m. to 10 a.m. Now I want to touch on a daily report example of how our daily summary reports work. I have a number highlighted in red, which is your confirmed number. That is the total amount of cattle captured for that reporting period for that day. Below that in green, I have highlighted the week-to-date number. As the week goes on, the confirmed number will be added to the week-to-date number. So if you miss a couple of days and you pick up a report, when you look at that week-to-date number, it will give you a snapshot of how many of cattle have traded throughout the week. Now I'm going to move on to another reporting form, the LPS 114, also known as the committed and delivered form. The committed and delivered form has the same reporting time frame as the 113 for 10 a.m. submission and 2 p.m. submission. This form is very straightforward. Committed cattle or cattle that are reported as committed as soon as they're scheduled for slaughter, and delivered is straightforward. This is the amount of cattle that are delivered to the plant. An example of one of the most popular committed and delivered reports we have is the daily committed and delivered, also known to us market news reporters as the LMCT 106. Here's another screenshot from the LS 114 form. As you can see the purchase types, state of origins, as well as the head counts. Now I want to give a little insight on how to read some of the committed delivered reports. Over the years, we've gotten several questions from stakeholders that were kind of confused on how this report works. As you can see, I have the 4 purchase types highlighted in red on the left side of your screen, and then some numbers highlighted in red on the right side of the screen. Those numbers highlighted in red account for the percentage of by purchase type that are delivered to the plant during this reporting period. So as you can see, 15% of negotiated cash transactions make up the daily total for this reporting period, as well as negotiated grid accounting for 4, and so on. Now moving on to some of the weekly reporting forms. One of the most highly viewed reporting forms on the weekly basis is the LPS 117, also known as the Premiums and Discounts Report. Our weekly reports, our weekly reporting forms are due at 9 a.m. Central Time. And the weekly premium and discount is the estimated premiums and discounts that a packer is going to use for that upcoming week. An example of this report that is derived from the 117 is the weekly 5-area premium and discount report, or also known to us market news reporters as the LMCT 169. As you can tell, this is a screenshot from one submission on the 117 form. You can tell where we have premiums for the prime and discounts on the select, as well as hard bones, weight, discounts, etc. Another thing you can see is the premiums and discounts for natural or NHTC cattle. Lastly, here's a screenshot of the 5-area weekly premium and discount report. This is a highly used report. This report is used in the CME settlement process. Now I'd like to talk to you about confidentiality. All of our live cattle reports have to use the 370-20 guideline, and it's applied to the report as a whole over a 60-day reporting period. Now let me unpack that for you. What does that really mean? Well, the 370-20 rule is really 3 rules wrapped in one. The 3 stands for you have to have 3 reporting entities at least 50% of the time over a 60-day reporting period. The 70 represents that no single reporting entity can provide more than 70% of the data over that 60-day reporting period. And lastly, the 20 is no single reporting entity may be the sole reporting entity of an individual report more than 20% of the time over that 60-day reporting period. That 60-day reporting period is very important, that you have to remember that all 3 of these rules are over a 60-day period. And if one rule fails, they all fail. Now let's talk about some current marketing trends that we've seen here recently. One thing that we've noticed is there's been an increased forward contract volume here as of this spring. Possibility of that is that for quite a while, the CME futures were low enough that it wasn't very advantageous for a producer to lock in a price at those levels. Another thing that we've noticed here is the increased negotiated grid volume. However, that has been different in some areas versus others. Here's a chart of both of those topics. As you can tell, the forward contracts dipped in the early part of 2020, but here in 2021 have increased quite a bit. Looking at the green line of negotiated grids, as this year has went on, we have gained overall negotiated grid volume, but more specifically in the Southern Plains. Kansas used to average around 1,000 head of negotiated grids a week. Now it's been sharply higher. I believe in the last month there was 2 times where we had over 10 to 11,000 head of them per week, as well as for Texas. Texas used to have 1,000 to 2,000 head of negotiated grids a week. Now, here's the last several months, we've steadily been getting 4,000 to 6,000. I believe there was one reporting week in Texas near 8,000. How do we review data? Well, every day we have some standard procedures to make sure that all the data that should be submitted is submitted. People ask us, well, what data do you guys take out? We take out as little data as possible. One standard operating procedure we do have is we do take out transactions of 10 head or less. We view those cattle as drop-in cattle that don't normally represent an adequate market. As reporters, we look for invalid records, odd prices, typos, and we gather those up, contact plants, and correct them, and to ensure that all the data we report is correct. With all this data, what are some options for you as a stakeholder to view them? Well, we have several. The first new option that we have is the My Market News page, as you can see to the right-hand side of this. This new website that we have developed allows you to subscribe to reports, have reports automatically emailed to you, as well as search our database by market type or specific report. Also, we have Data Mart. Nearly all LMR data, if you can see it on a report, you can get an archived database through Data Mart. And lastly, what a lot of new stakeholders are being turned on to is an API, or an application programming interface. This allows you to custom make a report that you want. Specifically, I'll give an example. If you just want the 5 area steers over 80% just delivered to you, you can build a program where that's all you get, the only data you get, and you don't have to sift through all the lines of data that we put out. And that concludes my presentation here tonight. I appreciate you guys, everyone being here, and I welcome your questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Charlie. Really enjoyed your presentation. Really liked that last slide where you talked about where we can go and get this information, either Data Mart or My Market News. That My Market News site is a very handy site for stakeholders to use to obtain that information. And so we can make sure that we make those web links available to the participants as we conclude this series. We did have a question that come in, and if you want to take a minute and answer this question. I didn't hear anything about auction cattle. Are auction cattle reported under LMR?
That's a great question, Jody. We've gotten that several times over the years. Auction cattle are not required to be reported under the LMR Act. That's in a public setting. LMR wants to capture just direct purchases, something that's not public between a buyer and seller. So, like I said, the auction cattle are not reported under LMR.
Okay, so I know that there's an interface where there's an electronic auction. Is that reported under LMR?
Yes, that is reported under LMR. USDA had legal counsel look into that, and they felt that that marketing platform fit the negotiated definition. So those transactions are reported under LMR.
Okay, okay, good deal. So one of the other questions that came in is, what does LMR stand for?
Livestock Mandatory Reporting.
Okay. So one more question, and then we'll move on to our second speaker tonight. In one of your slides, you mentioned, I think it was the LPS or LSP 114, state of origin. Can you describe or define what state of origin means, please?
Yeah, state of origin for live cattle is defined by where the cattle are fed to slaughter weight at. So let me give you an example. Let's say some cattle are fed to slaughter weight in Nebraska, but they're harvested in a plant in another state. Let's say they're harvested in Kansas. That transaction will be reported out of Nebraska on all LMR cattle reports, as that's the state where they were fed to slaughter weight in.
Okay, very good. Well, we will try to address some more questions that come through the Q&A after our second presenter this evening. I sure appreciate your time tonight, Charlie, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, our second speaker tonight is Dr. Stephen Koontz. Dr. Koontz is a professor in the Department of Agriculture and Resource Economics at Colorado State University. He works in the areas of commodity marketing and risk management, marketing price analysis, and agribusiness industry organizations. Dr. Koontz's interests are in commercial agriculture production and marketing and the functioning agribusiness. His responsibilities at Colorado State include outreach, teaching, and research. Dr. Koontz is going to dive further into the data in LMR reports and how to put that data to use to make marketing decisions for a cattle operation. Please welcome Dr. Stephen Koontz.
The purpose of this video is to record for the webinar, walking you through making use of LMR, price reports, and data from the AMS website. So let's get busy with that. It goes without saying that market information is important. It's important for individuals. It's absolutely essential for making good business decisions to know where the market is and what are some of the recent dynamics that have played out. So simply being informed about what has happened in the marketplace is critical for individuals. But it is actually more important than that. It's also important from an overall marketplace perspective. These free market economies that we live in and work in really require market participants to be well informed for those markets to function well. That is something that is not often talked about, and it is important. It's very important for there to be a considerable depth of individuals that are well informed in these marketplaces. So we need to be able to think about and talk about what are the prices, what are my opportunities. That's important for the individual and the marketplace. I also know that a lot of folks use data providers. They're providing information, and almost always the information that's provided is out of the USDA system. In particular, the prices are coming out of AMS. So it's going to be important to know a little more detail what goes on at AMS and what is reported. And one of the things I want to do next is take a little bit of a test drive of the AMS Market News website, dig around and see what reports are there. It's a very big website, and do not be disappointed by that. Do not worry about that. If there's something you're interested in and USDA AMS collects data on it, it will be on this website. So we're going to take a look at livestock, meat, poultry, eggs, grain, and hay. And our data portals, things that we can use to download data to our spreadsheets, are in that historical data. But before you worry about historical data, you need to get familiar with the reports. So if we click on cattle, what's going to happen is we're going to be popped down the page just a little bit. 8 links right here, 4 feeder cattle at the bottom. I go there all the time, but not the topic of today's webinar. The top 4 will have slaughter cattle in them, but you need to be careful. Slaughter cattle in some contexts are cull cows and bulls. So just because it says slaughter cattle doesn't mean it's fed cattle. All right, so slaughter cattle summary. The summary information is just that. We have daily summaries, daily direct, and weekly summaries. Now the weekly summaries, I make use of Colorado all the time. A lot of the times that weekly summary, the slaughter cattle component of that is cull cows and bulls. So this is going to have a nice summary of what's going on in the feeder market, and that's not really what we're after right here, right now. Take a look at the daily, the folks that are providing information on daily markets. That's a reasonably short list. And what's going on there? What is happening is that those individual states are communicating that it's important to them to get daily information pushed out. So those states are asking USDA, AMS at the federal level to help collect that information and push it out. So if you don't see what you're looking for there on a daily basis, that's because your state is not reporting what's going on a daily basis. If you look at Colorado, a lot of our markets are once a week markets. So what's going to happen is we will report that. But the summary links provide you a piece of information about what's happening that week. Let's click on slaughter cattle auctions. We don't sell a lot of fed cattle through auctions. So again, this is going to be a lot of cull cow and bull prices. And in addition to that, you'll see quite a few feeder animal prices there. So let's take a look at Colorado. And here's the 4 major markets that within Colorado are reported. And they're reported the week that the auction, or the day of the week that the auction occurs. For example, the brush auction is on Thursday. Now, lots of times during the summer, Colorado doesn't trade many cattle, so that auction may not operate a particular week. They're reporting when that auction works. Another important thing to think about and take a look, I've got a colleague I work with in California. There's no California prices because California is not participating in the system. And again, I've got another colleague in North Dakota, and you don't see links for North Dakota. It's not that it's not important. What happens is if there aren't state resources that are devoted to collecting this information, then the states are communicating to the federal system that the reporting of those markets are not very high on their list. So this is not a call that's made exclusively at the federal level. This reporting requires some state participation. But if you're interested in your particular local market, click on those links, see what's available, and if not enough is available for you, then you need to talk to your state level Department of Agriculture. All right, so now let's get into the LMR data. We're going to click on the National Direct Cattle Slaughter Cattle Reports, and one of my favorite publications for using with folks is this first one, the User's Guide. The User's Guide on this front page has some hot links to some of the major reports that people download. So let's go take a look at the LMCT 115. Click on that thing and we go right to the report. So I really like those pages that have hot links to the exact report themselves. But that is the user's guide. Another nice thing about the user's guide is it talks to you about the terminology that's used in the report. All right, so let's move a little further down the page. The very first link under the daily direct national is this 5-area daily weighted average slaughter cattle negotiated. So this is your cash market in that 5 area. So let's zoom in a little bit. We have our negotiated sales for steers, live, FOB feed yard, FOB plant, steers dressed delivered, steers dressed FOB yard, heifers live, dressed, and then mixed pens. And then within the particular category, for example, steers live FOB, we have the cross section of greater than 80% choice, 65 to 80% choice, 35 to 65% choice, and notice we don't have any in that 0 to 35% choice. We've really elevated the amount of choice cattle that are out there, and there's recently there's very few animals in this category. Okay, now this is the daily information. So the report comes out as of today, June 7th. This is your LMCT 100, and notice this is a recap for Friday. So the report comes out today, but it tells you what happened the last business day. Okay, this is your 5 market. Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico is 1. Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa are each individual markets, and then Iowa, Southern Minnesota is a particular region. So that is your 5 area in that list. Now if we go down the page a little bit, direct slaughter cattle negotiated purchases summary. That's going to be very similar to your 5 market weighted average. How's it different? It has some regions that are outside of that 5 area. Okay, so clicking on it will show us there's more head traded in this particular report because again it's outside of that 5 area. So let's move up a little bit. I don't want to overlap so much. I want to move up and show you a different transaction type. So this would be the formula purchases. Let's zoom in a little bit. LMCT 109 gives you, again, like the other report, head counts, weights, average weights, weight distributions, average prices, and then the price range. So in the formula and grid transactions, the formula net, what's that net? The net is formulas frequently have a system of premiums and discounts. So we have to slaughter the animals, get them graded first before we know the exact transaction price. And this is after that happens. Okay, so this would be your net price after we've graded the carcasses and we know exactly how to value those animals. So we've got formula net on a dress basis and formula net on a live basis and negotiated grid on a dress basis and negotiated grid on a live basis. So the negotiated grid is different from the formula in that we're negotiating the base price in that grid. Again, lots of formulas have premiums and discounts, but they're not negotiating anything. They're just using prices that are discovered elsewhere. All right, so that is the unique piece of information that's different from the negotiated purchases, the formula transactions, and then let's go all the way back up towards the top of the list. One of my favorites is a one-pager. Again, it comes out on Monday. It says this is a daily information, so a daily direct summary comes out on Monday, but it's as of what happened on Friday. Has some nice graphics to communicate, in this example, carcass weights. But again, this report has links that will take you right to, again, that CT 109 was the report that summarized the formula transactions. And then the LMCT 100 was that 5 area report we took a look at. So this particular PDF file lives on my desktop, gets updated every day, and lots of times I'll click on it and it'll take me right to the exact report. So again, a very nice summary piece of information. So let's go down the page a little further. If you follow cattle markets, what you know is these markets are largely weekly markets. We bid and ask all week long. We trade some cattle all week long, but we primarily trade on 1 or 2 days of the week, and I view the weekly summary as really giving you the essential information for understanding what's going on, especially if you're someone like me who's using data to do research or making more general recommendations and softer recommendations to producers. I'm not so good at or worried about what's happening on a day-to-day basis. I really want to know what's the weekly summary. So let's look at the 5-area report, 5-area weighted average. This is your CT 150, negotiated cash sales, gives you a head count, weight range, price range, average weight, and then a weighted average price. Again, across steers, live delivered, dressed delivered, and dressed FOB yard. Also into the heifers, and then the mixed pens. So really a comprehensive look at information across the 5-area. This report comes out June 7th, and it is for the prior week, so the week ending Sunday, June 6th. So this is a summary of the negotiated direct trade that happened last week. All right, so there's your direct trade, and the next link in the list is the similar information for the alternative marketing methods. LMCT 145 comes out today, June 7th, and is as of the week ending last Sunday, June 6th. So I have the formula net price on a dressed basis across steers, heifers, and mixed pens. Formula net on a live basis. So steers over 80% choice. The weighted average price was $122.94. And then negotiated grid, dress basis. And negotiated grid, live basis. So if you look at the negotiated grid, $124.31, a little better price than the formula. A couple of categories up. Okay, so in this weekly direct national, I have the negotiated trade and then all of the alternatives to the negotiated market. Well, let's go back there for a second. So not only do we have the formula and the negotiated grid, if we go down far enough, I've got the forward contract transactions as well. So what are forward contracts? Those are trades we make today for delivery in 30 days or more. A lot of these are linked to the futures market, so you can see what people are forward contracting with packers for delivery next month or further out. Okay, and then the third link, a nice comprehensive summary, 3-page document, gives you some graphics and summary of really lots of what's happening in this market. Very thorough. Okay, and then finally, let's move all the way down to the bottom here in the weekly direct national. And like we have a daily summary, we have a weekly summary, single-page PDF file that has some graphics, has some head counts, and hot links to other reports. That CT 151 was my weekly summary, and I've got the national price, the 5-area price. Notice nationally there's a few more animals than in the 5-area, and then I have my regional breakdown of transactions for the week, and then I can compare that to what's going on, the dressed transactions versus the negotiated trade transactions. So in Texas, 44,000 head through formula, and 5,800 head through the negotiated trade. So you can keep track of both volume and prices. One of the sticky points for me is that oftentimes in Colorado, it's hard to get information on what's going on in the negotiated market. And the problem is that we don't have enough packers in this market for the price to be reported. So you have to be aware of some of the limitations that, for example, AMS has to live with when they go provide this information to us. All right, I'm interested in cattle premiums and discounts. If you click on this PDF, it's going to tell you to go back and click on that text file. So let's cut to the chase. I have premiums and discounts associated with slaughter cattle transactions across different measures of quality. Okay, so I've got discounts associated with over 30 months of age. My base unit here, my base for comparison is a choice animal, and what you see is you have premiums for prime and CAB and all natural. So if you're interested in all natural or NHTC, it can show you the premiums that are being paid for that. In addition, there's premiums and discounts associated with cutability, your yield grades, big discounts with yield grades 4 or higher, and then premiums for really good yielding carcasses. And then the base carcass weight is a 600 to 900 pound animal, and there's potentially some discounts for lighter carcasses and discounts for heavier carcasses. So very thorough information for what's going on nationally in the fed cattle market. Now, nationally is a good summary of things, but lots of times we're interested in what's going on in a particular region. So that's the fourth link. Let's click on that thing. Hey, there's the user's guide again. Again, very useful definitions, hot links to important commonly used reports. So on a daily basis across the region, we have some afternoon reports. If we go take a look at Colorado, let's take a look. Very few cattle have a tendency to trade in any one day. So lots of times there's not much reported here. Let's go take a look at Kansas and see if they reported any. So this came out June 7 and trade so far as of today. Okay, not much going on a Monday. Summary reports. I might be interested in detailed information that comes out right away, or I might be interested in the summary of things as we get through the end of the day, some details when the report comes out, and this is the roundup for last Friday. So this tells me LMCT 118, this is the negotiated purchases summary for last Friday in Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, across steers, heifers of different quality grades. So very thorough, very nice detail on what's happening in this market. So I might be interested in that 5 area. That's also something I could get on the other link. So lots of times you can go one place and many of the things you're looking for are there. Now let's go look at the weekly negotiated. Here's your LMCT 150 weighted average across the 5 area. Report comes out today, Monday, and it's as of last week. Gives you a very thorough accounting of what's happening in the fed cattle market the prior week. Head counts, weight ranges, price ranges, average weights, and weighted average prices across your negotiated sales, across the different mix of pens, and some comparisons through time. Okay, so there's the negotiated trade. Let's go take a look at formula, forward contract, and negotiated grids. LMCT 145 report comes out June 7 for cattle priced at the end of last week. So lots of detail across alternatives to using the negotiated market. So formula, negotiated grid, and forward contract, really across the depth of what the fed cattle market makes use of. It's all right here. Okay, I might be interested in those premiums and discounts, and there it would be for the week. Okay, so it comes out on Monday, tells us what's happening across the week, not just on a given day. Okay, so lots and lots of very thorough information about our different markets. All right, so let's move back to the presentation. I would argue that we've test-driven the website. There's plenty of information there. Take your time and dig through it. It's worth doing. There's an awful lot there that's very likely your data provider is summarizing some small portion of it. So if you're up to something new or different, maybe you need more detailed data. So go take a look at the website and be able to see the granularity associated with the data that are reported. Now let's back up for a second. We've looked at some numbers, we've looked at some links. If we go to that data portal and download some of this data, what might we learn? And let me give you just a few examples of this. So I've got the 5-area cattle price from 2016 all the way up to now. I've got the different groups with varying quality grade, so greater than 80% choice, 65 to 80% choice, 35 to 65% choice, and then the weighted average of everything. And what you see is the prices are very much in line. It's hard to see one from the other, and that's because across this very large range, the premiums associated with these higher value animals is going to be hard to separate from the lower value animals. Those particular premiums are just not big enough to see on this type of graph. But let's zoom in and take a look. And before we do that, I want you to take a look at this graph for a second. We've got a pandemic in this time period. We have trade wars in this time period, and they don't just stand out all by themselves. These markets are very volatile. There's lots of seasonality, lots of volatility. It's hard to notice any particular event being different from prior events. Many similar things have dramatic impacts on commodity prices. But let's zoom into that time period and take a look and see if we can see the premiums and discounts more clearly. Definitely there are time periods where the high quality animals are priced at a premium to the lower USDA quality grade animals. You see that very clearly in this series, but they do very much run in tandem. Now let's do something similar, but compare cash prices to formula prices. Cash is the dark line, formula is the lighter of the two, and what we see is the formula follows the cash down and the formula follows the cash up. What happens is formulas lots of times are using the prior week's negotiated price. So it tends to move right in tandem after you adjust for premiums and discounts. Very, very similar prices over a long period of time. And I'm expecting as this continues to rally, that formula will follow it. Now let's compare cash prices to that other category we saw, the forward contracts. Are they dramatically different? What tends to happen is the cash market moves lower than forward contracts, and the cash market moves higher than forward contracts. So that forward contract shows lower volatility and shows some of the people's willingness to trade off some of those big price moves for more stable prices. That's really a lot of what we see going on with respect to forward contracts is the volatility. There's the forward contracted prices are clearly for folks that are trading risk. Now I want to move away from the graphics, and I want to take a look at a resource I get from my data provider, the Livestock Marketing Information Center. I've got a basis table here. If I was feeding steers in Kansas, and if I had some steers that came off of, for example, wheat pasture in May, and I might market this coming fall. So what I want to do is I want to zoom in on this section of this dense table. I'm going to have some wheat pasture calves that come off potentially the first or second week of November, and I'm going to hedge those with the December contract. So we're focused in on the December contract, and I have a price history of basis through time. That's the cash minus futures. I've got an average for the 14 through 18 time period, but I'm not really necessarily comfortable using those two averages because I know there are time periods in here with lots and lots of volatility. 14 and 15 would be it, and I'm not sure I want to put 2020 into almost any sort of calculation. I'd really like 2020 to be in the rearview mirror and be fading away. So if we take a look at 2019, we had a futures market that was very optimistic almost the entire year. It communicated higher prices and higher prices as we went through, especially September, October, November, and December of 2020. And the cash market was lower than the futures market through 2019. And I'm not sure that's the case going forward. So I think what I want to do is I want to calculate this average potentially using those 3 years. Let's toss out the highly volatile years, 14 and 15, and let's toss out the 20-year, and maybe we want to think hard about including 2019 and the optimism that was in that year. You know, maybe your impression is 2019 is likely what's going to happen for the remainder of 2021, and that would tell you to anticipate some negative basis. But if I go calculate an average using those three numbers, I get a basis that's plus 10, and I can identify a worst case scenario and a best case scenario. But then I might have a different worst case scenario if a situation like 29 starts to play out, where we have a futures market that is very optimistic. And then if I think my calves might actually be the second week in October, if I use those three to calculate an average, I get something like a minus 20. And again, a best case and a worst case scenario. About a little better than a buck over and a little worse than a dollar under, with an average about minus 20. Now, my point to this exercise is not to focus on the numbers. The point is to illustrate thinking using data to incorporate into my risk management plan what's my best guess for basis this coming year for these wheat pasture calves that are going to come out in early November. Again, it's not the number itself, it's to work you through the thinking of, okay, my data provider puts together this information for me. How do I use it to make a decision that's good for me? So some things that we see in this LMR data. Some very strong seasonal patterns. Steer and heifer prices are basically not different. They're very different for feeder cattle, not for fed cattle. You have substantial and explainable premiums and discounts across USDA quality grade and yield grade. There are reasonable seasonal patterns. If you look at that 5 area versus the individual areas, the differences make a lot of sense. And if we look across the different marketing types, cash versus formula and forward contracting, they're really not all that different. There is a cattle market and a representative price, and the differences that are there make sense from, for example, how formulas are structured and the risk reduction that goes along with forward contracts. What you have in this data set are some really clear benchmarks. And I think USDA, AMS, and also NAS are very much establish a gold standard when it comes to provision of data and data collection. Some conclusions. Fed cattle prices are highly variable and volatile. And this is just a fact of life in commodity markets. It's not unique to fed cattle or feeder cattle. It's all commodity markets. So staying up to date about what's happening in the marketplace is important, as is risk management. You see the volatility and variability. Market news can tell you the cash side of that story, and you need to mix it up with the CME Group's information, possibly from your broker, to tell you the futures and options side. And I also think that risk management, it's essential, and those livestock revenue protection products from RMA are worth a hard look by any producer. I'm involved with some education programming that National Cattlemen's Beef Association should deliver this year and hopefully into next. So if you're interested in that, look for it. So what's next? Make time, develop a routine. Get into that website, get to know your reports. You'll learn the numbers. Ask your information provider hard questions. What's in the data they're pushing back to you? Can you get some different data? Is there something unique about your business or system that you need some different data for? And can you create some opportunities from that? And in the end, what's the rate of return on my business, and what can I do to make it better? Market information is often essential for that. So in the end, you're going to have to go to those data portals and get familiar through that process. So here's a cheat sheet on my website script. So if you're interested, if I went through that website stuff a little bit too fast, this is what I did. But then again, you can always back up the video. And finally, here are a couple of those resources I pointed you to. I think they're very worthwhile. They're worth putting on your desktop and getting familiar with to learn what's going on here. And then last, we're going to head back to the live portion of the webinar.
Well, thank you, Dr. Koontz. I really appreciate your presentation. You did a nice job of walking the participants tonight through the USDA's Livestock, Poultry, and Grain Market News website. I appreciate you taking the time to do that. And we did have a few questions that come through on the Q&A. Back in your presentation, you had a report up that had the national 5 area and then the different regions. Okay. And do you see any one region where the prices are, higher or lower than the other?
Oh, absolutely not. There's very much a national cattle market. You have a, pardon me, you have some distinct seasonal patterns that are primarily production driven that are different across the regions. For example, you'll have more cattle come in early in the south, less tough winter feeding conditions. So what's going on in the south in the spring is a little different than what's going on in the north, where you're dealing with harsher weather conditions. And then in the north, when they get later in the summer, you've got a lot of cattle that the feeders have access to relatively cheap feedstuffs. So the general dynamics that you see play out across the regions makes a lot of sense from the standpoint of just production seasonality.
Okay. Well, for the sake of time, I would like to go ahead and invite Charlie back and answer. We had another question that came in that I think would pertain to Charlie and the USDA. If he would join us, we'll go ahead and ask that question. Charlie, the question was, how can I relate direct slaughter figures with delivered and committed cattle figures?
Yeah, the committed and delivered, that'll be off the 114 form. We touched on that in the presentation, where the committed is where the cattle are committed for slaughter at a future date, and obviously delivered is when they're delivered to the plant. Those figures will correlate with your direct slaughter cattle figures. However, they will be a little bit delayed, especially on the delivered side. Once that deal is struck, it may take some time for those cattle to be delivered.
Okay. And we have one more question that we're going to address, and then we're going to conclude for this evening. Is the dressed weight and or dressing percentage reported on a hot or chilled basis? Is it reported the same way on all reports?
Yeah, our reports, we report cattle on a selling basis, whether it's a live selling basis or a dress selling basis. Your dress selling basis is going to be your hot carcass weight hanging there in the cooler. A dress basis is on the hoof. All of our reports have both of those selling bases reported, and that will include dressing percentages as well for each one of those selling bases. Okay.
Well, good deal. Well, running short on time here, and we know everybody's want to get on with their evening. So sure appreciate Dr. Koontz and Charlie joining us tonight. Dr. Koontz, we'll see you back here tomorrow for our part 2. So then again, I just thank Dr. Koontz and Mr. Potts for your time and expertise, and all the participants that have viewed this webinar. Our goal is to leave each and every one of you during this session with a better understanding of these beef cattle industry practices and processes, and hope we accomplish that tonight. Please take a moment to complete our participation survey. You can use the UR code up in the upper left hand portion of the screen, and this feedback shapes what USDA Cattle and Carcass Center activities will focus on as we move forward. So we really do appreciate you take the time to provide your thoughts. One last reminder that the recording of tonight's webinar will be available and on the USDA website at the conclusion of this webinar series, as well as a copy of the presentation material. I hope you'll join us again tomorrow night as we continue our series with a look at the LMR box beef reports. Our presenters will expand and explain the concepts related to price differences between the various USDA quality grades of wholesale beef cuts and dive into specific key elements of the reports that can be used to make more informative production and marketing decisions. Our series will conclude on Thursday night with a panel of 3 industry members who will share with us how they use these reports in real world for forecasting, decision-making, and risk management. Good night, everyone, and we'll see you back here same time, same place tomorrow.